The air in the cab smelled of old leather and someone else's anxiety. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the manicured lawns of Chestnut Hill blur past. Each sprawling colonial, each pristine gate, was a monument to a life I'd been surgically removed from. The dress I wore was simple, navy silk. The most expensive thing I owned, bought 4 years ago for a career I no longer had. I'd chosen it carefully. A quiet statement. I am still your daughter. I still belong. The driver whistled low as we turned onto the long, familiar driveway, lined with vintage lanterns glowing softly in the dusk. "Big do," he remarked. The massive Tudor-style house was ablaze with light. The sounds of a string quartet and laughter spilled out into the velvet evening. Valets in crisp uniforms darted between gleaming Bentleys and Teslas. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The pearl anniversary. Appropriate, I thought with a pang. Something formed under pressure. Layer upon layer of perfect nacre, smooth and impenetrable. I'd gotten the embossed invitation a month ago. My name, Ava Thorne, was written in my mother's flawless script. No and guest. Just me. I hadn't RSVP'd. Showing up was my answer. The last 4 years had been a slow unraveling. Choosing a career in social work over the family finance firm had been the first tear. Marrying Leo, a kind, soft-spoken teacher with student debt and a 2005 Honda, had been the rip. But the real schism, the unforgivable sin, had been standing by him when he got sick. When the medical bills started to drown us and I'd asked just once for help, my father had said, "You made your bed, Ava. Now you have to find a way to pay for the hospital to come and make it for you." Leo died 18 months ago. The bed was empty. The silence they offered was louder than any argument. I slipped past the valets, a ghost in silk. The grand foyer was a whirl of perfume and tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers refracted light over women in gowns that cost more than my annual salary. I saw faces I'd known since childhood. My parents' friends, their children, now grown into perfect replicas. A few eyes glanced my way, flickered with vague recognition, then darted away, unsure. And then I saw them. My mother, Eleanor, in a stunning silver gown, her laugh a practiced tinkling bell. My father, Robert, commanding in his tuxedo, a hand on a colleague's shoulder. They were the picture of triumphant endurance. For a moment, my courage faltered. What was I doing here? I was a smudge on their perfect portrait. But then I thought of Leo. He'd have wanted me to try, to bridge the uncrossable sea. I took a deep breath, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs, and walked towards them. I was about 10 feet away when my mother's eyes found me. The brilliant smile on her face didn't fade. It simply froze, then hardened like cooling wax. Her gaze swept over me, from my simple updo to my off-the-rack dress, and in that instant, I felt every loss, every sleepless night, every meal skipped to pay a bill. She leaned in and whispered something to my father. He turned. His expression wasn't one of shock or anger, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Like I was a telemarketer who'd somehow gotten past the gate. I reached them. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice barely steady. "Happy anniversary." The small circle around them fell silent. An aunt I barely recognized gasped softly. "Ava," my father said, his voice a low, controlled rumble meant only for me, though everyone listened. "You were not expected." "I was invited," I replied, holding up my clutch, the invitation inside it like a shield. "This is a private event," my mother said. Her smile still plastered on for the audience. Her eyes were chips of ice. "You are not in a position to be here. Look at you." The quiet condemnation in her voice was worse than a shout. I was a walking embodiment of failure, a stain on their success. "I'm your daughter," I said, the words thick in my throat. "I just wanted to congratulate you, to be here for your day." "You are being here is an embarrassment, Ava," my father said, his patience visibly snapping. "You made your choices. You don't get to parade your consequences into our home. Not tonight." The cold finality of it stole my breath. I wasn't a prodigal daughter. I was a contagion. I saw it then, not just in them, but in the ring of polished, pitying faces around us. I was a cautionary tale they'd tell their own children. Don't end up like poor Ava Thorne. My mother, ever the orchestrator, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to a large man in a dark suit standing by the arched doorway to the ballroom. Security. Of course. The man moved with efficient grace. He was at my side in 3 strides. His hand clamped around my upper arm, not painfully, but with an impersonal, unbreakable firmness. "Sir?" he said to my father. My father didn't even look at me. His eyes swept over his guests, a sigh, a silent apology for the disruption. "This person is not on the list. Please escort her from the premises." This person. The words were a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. The security guard began to steer me away. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in my throat. "Dad, please," I whispered. But the music had swelled again, and the conversation was resuming. The spectacle was over. As the guard walked me forcefully back through the foyer, I caught fragments of conversation. "Always was unstable. That husband of hers probably wants money." Then, as we neared the grand front door, my mother's voice, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, rang out across the suddenly hushed space. She wasn't shouting. She was simply issuing a command, wanting no confusion about my status. "Get this beggar out of my house." Time stopped. The words hung in the air, more cutting than any physical ejection. "Beggar." Asterisk. The guard's grip tightened, and he all but pushed me over the threshold. The heavy oak door shut behind me with a soft, definitive thud, muffling the music and the light. I stood on the vast stone steps, trembling. The valets looked anywhere but at me. The night air, once soft, now felt biting. I had no car to call for. I had nothing. I walked down the driveway, my heels clicking a hollow rhythm on the asphalt. The sounds of my parents' lavish celebration, a cruel soundtrack to my exile. I walked for miles, numb, the silk dress now feeling like a ridiculous costume. The city buses didn't run out here. I finally called for a rideshare from the edge of a gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh on my tear-streaked face. That night, in my tiny, silent apartment, something broke. Not into pieces, but open. The last fragile thread of hope, the childish belief that family was unconditional, had been severed by my mother's voice saying, "Beggar." The pain was volcanic, but as it cooled, it left behind a new, unyielding bedrock of resolve. I would never beg from them again. Not for money, not for approval, not for love. The next morning, I didn't cry. I made coffee. I opened my laptop. I had a purpose now, cold and clear. To prove that the life I built, the values I'd chosen, were not marks of failure, but of a different kind of strength. My social work license was up to date. I threw myself into my job at the community center with a ferocity that surprised my supervisors. I started a nightly routine of online courses in nonprofit management and grant writing. I used my pain as fuel, working late hours to develop a new outreach program for young widows and widowers, a demographic often overlooked. I called it the Next Chapter, a support group paired with practical financial and vocational workshops. I wrote the grant proposal myself, weaving in data with a quiet passion that came from lived experience. 6 months after the anniversary party, the grant was approved. It was substantial. A local paper did a small feature on the program. My picture was in it, a headshot where my eyes looked tired but steady. I wondered if my parents saw it. I found I didn't much care. A year to the day after I was thrown out, I received a letter. Thick, cream-leathered stationery, my father's office address. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. It was from my father's lawyer. My grandfather's trust, a modest one he'd left for me, was finally being released. My parents had been its custodians. The letter was cold, legal, and attached was a check for a sum that, while not life-changing in their world, was a fortune in mine. It was the exact amount, I realized after some stunned calculation, that Leo's final medical bills had totaled. A clean financial severance, a final settlement. I stared at it for a long time. Then I endorsed the check. But not to deposit. I walked to the bank that held the mortgage for the community center, a crumbling but beloved building in the heart of the city. I sat down with the manager and made the largest single payment the center had ever seen, in the name of the Leo J. Alvarez Memorial Fund. The remaining balance of the check I used as seed money to establish a small independent fund for the Next Chapter program, ensuring it would outlive any single grant. There was no announcement, no fanfare. But the center director cried when she saw the paperwork. That was enough. Another year passed. I was promoted to director of community programs. My life was full of purpose, of connections that were earned, not inherited. I had friends who showed up with soup when I was sick, colleagues who debated passionately with me over coffee, and the profound gratitude of people my program had helped. It was a rich tapestry, woven with threads of mutual respect and shared struggle. Then, one Tuesday, my assistant said, "Your mother is on line 1. The world didn't tilt. I simply finished the sentence I was typing and picked up the phone. "This is Ava." A beat of silence. "Ava, it's your mother. I know. What can I do for you?" Her voice was different, thinner, stripped of its commanding brightness. "Your father, he's had a cardiac event. He's stable, but it's been a scare. He's asking for you." I looked out my office window at the vibrant, messy, beautiful street below. Children were playing in the fountain at the small park we'd fought the city to renovate. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I was. I felt a distant sorrow for the human suffering, but it was separate from me. "Will you come to the house? He wants to make amends." The word hung in the air. Amends, asterisk. I thought of the coldness in the foyer, the security guard's hand, the word beggar slicing through the air. "No," I said, gently but without hesitation. "I don't think that would be a good idea." "Ava, please, we're your parents." "You are," I agreed. And for a long time, that meant everything to me. But you defined the terms of our relationship very clearly. You showed me who I was to you on your anniversary. I've had to accept that." "We were wrong," she said, and the admission sounded torn from her. "The things we said, the way we treated you, we see now. The life you've built." "I'm glad you see it," I interrupted, not unkindly. "It's a good life. It's an honest one. But my coming there, to that house, wouldn't help anyone. It would just reopen old wounds. I hope Father recovers fully. If you need recommendations for excellent home care nurses, my office can provide some. Many of them were trained through our vocational programs." The silence on the other end was profound. I had not rejected her with anger or vitriol. I had done it with the calm, polite finality of a professional setting a boundary. I had offered a resource, not a relationship. "I see," she whispered finally. The words were heavy with a loss I understood all too well. Take care, Mother, I said, and I meant it. I hung up. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my sunlit office, in the heart of a community that was my home. I felt a quiet peace. The past was a country I had left, and there were no borders left to cross back into it. The ache was a distant echo, not a present pain. That evening, I walked to the community center. There was a next chapter meeting. I didn't lead it anymore. A wonderful woman named Maya, who'd found her way through the group after losing her partner, now facilitated. I often just sat in the back, a quiet presence. Tonight, a new woman was there. She was probably my age, her eyes hollow with the grief I knew intimately. She spoke haltingly about the bills, the loneliness, the family that didn't understand. Maya spoke with empathy, outlining the resources available. The woman listened, a faint flicker of hope in her eyes. As the meeting broke, I went over to her. "Hi," I said, smiling. "I'm Ava. It gets easier, not better, but easier. And you're not alone anymore." She looked at me, and a single tear tracked down her cheek. Not of despair, but of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. I walked home under a canopy of city stars, the sounds of traffic and life a comforting hum. I was no one's beggar. I was a builder. I had taken the shattered pieces they'd left me with and built a shelter, not just for myself, but for others lost in the same storm. The love I had chosen, the life I had fought for, had not been in vain. It was my legacy, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Hey everyone, thanks for reading. If this story of resilience and rebuilding your own life resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. We talk a lot about finding strength in difficult places, and your support helps us keep sharing these narratives. Tell us in the comments below, what does family mean to you? Is it blood? Or is it something you choose? Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Remember, your worth isn't determined by where you come from, but by the path you choose to walk. See you next time.